how can I change some text in a text box on my Microsoft Access form and either replace a word in the text box as users are using it, or insert text, maybe put some inserted text between some words that weren't there before, and things like that. I'm your host, Sean McKenzie, and thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. Today we're going to go and look at the SelStart and SelText properties in our Microsoft Access text boxes in order to allow for changing of text on the fly using VBA. Without further ado, let's get to it. Are you a programmer looking for your next gig? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description. Okay, so this is a similar file that we've used in previous episodes, and I've got this select description table here, and I just took some information about two islands in Hawaii, and that data came from Wikipedia, and I just pasted it in there so that we can use some words to find and replace and stuff, and I also used it because I love Hawaii and it's awesome. So okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to use the form wizard, and I'm just going to create a default sort of columnar form here using the wizard. I'll change the name of the form and I'll call it select description form, and I'll just open it to view the information. We have two records in there, very simple. Here's a description that came from Wikipedia, and I've got two records, one for Kauai and one for Oahu. And so what we're going to do, I think maybe I'll expand this text box here. So I'll just go to the design, and the default size that it gave wasn't very big, so I'll close that sidebar there, and I'm just going to go and increase the size of this text box so that we can see what we're doing when we create our VBA. Okay, and if I look at the form view, I can see the first paragraph that came from Wikipedia here, and there's some words in here that we could use, maybe garden for the garden aisle, and also I think in Oahu there's a couple of neat ones too. So we'll go back to design, and I'm going to choose a text box from the controls on the form design ribbon there, and I'm just going to drop a text box onto the form. I'm going to throw it into the header, and we'll call this look for, and that's just the label on the left there. That's the label for that text box. It's sort of a default setting, and you can see that it's been given the name text5, which isn't very nice to read. So we'll change the name in the other tab, and we'll call it txt check, and that's gonna give us something nice to look for in our VBA. And I'm just gonna Control C, Control V to copy and paste that same text box, and I'll just say replace as an optional optional setting that we can use when we're using these two text boxes, just to demonstrate how this works. And so this one's also, it's called text7, so we'll change that to txt replace, and that'll give us two text boxes that we can use to look for text inside of our description text there on the form, and we can use these text boxes and their events. So I'm going to click on the event tab, and we're going to look at this after update event here. We're going to go ahead and click on the ellipsis and then the code builder, and then OK. And what that's going to do is it'll open the code editor, the IDE that we have here for VBA, and that's going to allow us to start coding. Now you can see it created this nice txt check after update event, which is something that we want to use. And we're going to use that one, but we're also going to use the same event on the txt replace text box, and because they're both going to fire off the same subroutine. So we're actually going to create our subroutine outside of the txt check after update, so that we can reuse that code, which is very important, because basically we want the same thing to happen when we update either of those text boxes. And so one nice thing that we have here is we can call it find text. That'll be the name of our subroutine, and I'll put a comment at the top saying what this routine does. It finds text in the text box and optionally replaces it. And we're going to grab some or create some variables here. I think I'm going to use I'll use the start. I need to know where in the text box our string that we're searching for starts at. The length of the string, that's the len, int len there. We're going to define the string that we're going to find, the text that we're going to find it in, and then we're going to have a couple of variants that could receive a null. And so we're going to put those as variants. We'll use one for the text and one for the replacement, which could be null if we don't want to replace and we just want to find whatever text it is in that text box. So in that case it would be a null, and so we want to have a variable that will handle a null. So I'm going to jump to the end of our procedure here, and as you can see I've put up above on error go to sub error, and at the bottom we're going to have a sub exit where it's actually going to exit. So if everything happens correctly in the subroutine, it's just going to exit before it gets to that sub error. But if it does get an error, it's going to jump to that sub error section, which is where we can handle an error or ignore an error if we want to, and that's going to be important later, and I'll show you what happens there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if the txt check text box is null, then I'm just going to get out of the subroutine. I'm not going to do anything, and so basically the subroutine will end there. But if there is something in there, then we're going to load our variables, and so I'm going to say my find variable is equal to me txt check, and I'm going to say the text is equal to me txt text, and I think actually that should be the description text, I think is the name of it there. Yeah, so you can see it in the drop down. So I'll call that description text, and then we're going to go ahead and load the length of our desired text that we're putting in there, whatever it is. So we want to get the length, and we'll put that into the int len variable, which has a maximum length of 32,000 something or other. I can't remember, 766 or something. So make sure you check that out. It's over 32,000, but it's not very long that we can use for this particular purpose. So if you're looking at really big text, you probably might need to use another method for that. But for anything shorter than that, I think we're golden. So I've got my length, and I'm gonna grab the starting point. So now that I've got my find string in there, I'm gonna go ahead and load that. I'm gonna say int start is equal to in string starting at 1 in this text, find this particular string, and so that's going to give me the starting point, and then I'll grab that replacement from the txt replace. Again, I'm using a variant there in case that's null, and we're going to use that a little bit later. So from there, what we can do is we can say, if our starting point is greater than 0, so in other words, we found it. If it's 0, it means it didn't find it. the str find. Then we'll use our trusty with statement so that we can just use the dots here. So we'll say dot set focus. We're going to set focus on our text box there, and we'll say dot SelStart is equal to int start minus 1 because the starting point is actually the first character, so we want to go back 1, and then the selection length we're going to set equal to the length of our word that we were looking for, because we found it, so we know it's not going to go past the end of the string. And then I'm just going to load that var text with whatever we find, just so that we can output it, and just to show that we sort of found what it was that we were looking for, and we can go ahead from there. And that should be test there. Okay, so that's just a test command. We're going to output into that immediate window that you see just below us there, whatever we find, and then what we're going to do is if not is null or replacement var replace, then we're going to set that selection text equal to the thing that we want to replace it with. And I'll just mention that does throw an error, but we can ignore it in order to make this one work. And so that just says, if we made a selection, or if we put something into our replace text box, then replace the text that you find with that. And then after all that is done, I think I'll debug.print our starting point, and then a comma, and then I'll just put that var text that we loaded for testing in there so that we can see what's going on. And that's our debug. It's going to put it in the immediate window down below there that you can see, and then we can sort of go ahead and maybe shorten this up. We've got a full procedure here now. It's going to exit when it hits here. If it gets an error, it's just going to go into that error sub error area there, and we can do something about that. But before we do that, I'll debug compile this, and I'll just sort of make do a quick test here and see sort of what we get when we use our find text. So before we do that, we need to actually call our subroutine, and I think because I saved it, it actually got rid of my after update that I had created. So I'll go back and I'll do it the sort of roundabout way by going back to the interface here, just so that you guys can see. So I'll minimize this here, and I'll do the same thing I did before on txt check on the after update. I'm going to use that ellipsis. I'm going to choose the code builder, and then hit OK. And now you can see there's the event that we wanted to populate. And all I'm going to do is paste in the name of my subroutine. There's no arguments on the subroutine, so I don't need to put anything after that. I just need to put the name of it there, and that's going to be super handy. So now we can call that subroutine from anywhere, and we can reuse it. But first, what we'll do is we're going to go and test the first part of it, which is, can we find some text in our text box that's down below there? So if I go ahead and put in some word in there, we'll test it out to see if it's working. I'll type garden and nothing happened, so it looks like I broke it already. Probably I got a name wrong here somewhere, and let's just check that out and see. If I pull up my code window, oh yeah, I've got the wrong name here. So the with me exclamation txt text, I was going to rename that one too, but I never did in the end. So let's change that back. We'll put that to me description text. That's the one that we loaded the value from. And now I could have used option explicit at the top of this procedure. That would have alerted me when I did the debug compile. So now let's try that again. So I'm going to type in garden, and let's just see if it'll highlight it. So we'll type in garden, tab off of that, and you can see there we go. Okay, so it's working now. We've got garden aisle in there, and if I type in kawaii, you can see it will find Kauai and it highlights it. And if I scroll forward to a different record and I type in, something else, even the very first word in the whole, in the whole description, it will find it, it'll highlight it, and that's kind of what we want to do there. So if I type in Hawaii, it'll find that inside of the text box that I have there. But so how does that replace work then? So we can find our text that we want, and the replace is pretty straightforward as well. We've already programmed it in there. So we said, if we found it, then we're going to use that replace variable and put it in there. So the other way that you can create that, instead of going to the ellipsis, is you can use that left drop down while you're in the IDE, and it will create a default event for you. In this case, it's before update, but we're going to ignore that, and in the right drop down there, you can choose the right one that you want, which is after update. And so now I can just paste in the exact text the procedure that I want, and that is the find text subroutine. And now we've reused that code twice instead of copying and pasting it. That's better. That's better for code reuse and also for maintenance. And so we can go ahead and test it here. And so now when I type in garden, it finds it, but because it was empty, it didn't do anything on the replace. But now I can type in awesome here, and you can see if I tab off of there, now you can see down there it's changed garden aisle to awesome aisle because Kauai is super awesome. And so you could use that for any type of text that you want to replace. If I go to another record in here, it works just the same way. And so you can use this in all different kinds of ways. Now I'll close that, and I'm going to save it, and then I can go ahead and reopen this form. I can choose it from the list here, and it's going to open with those, the two records that we saw. We've got totally awesome here, but what if we wanted to insert some data? Well, you can do that in a number of ways, but the easiest way is to find the text that you're looking for, and then either put a prefix or a suffix on that item, and then basically just do the same thing. So if I wanted to insert totally awesome when I found that one particular thing, then I just replace the original text with itself and then the prefix or the suffix as the case may be. And so that's how you can do insertion of text when you find a particular value on the form. And now if I find totally awesome, I can change it back if I want, or if I wanted to even put it back to garden aisle, I can do that as well. And that's sort of a nice way of doing those things. And so you can go between rows. I can go to a different record in here, and I can change what it is that I'm looking for. Maybe I could look for Oahu and tab off of that, and it'll change it to garden if I leave that garden one in there. And it'll change the first one to garden. Now make note of that, because it only finds the first one because it is SelStart, which is where the first found item starts. And so it's only make a note that it only finds the one. Oh, I scrolled off the end. It only finds the first instance and changes it. And so make sure you check out my other videos where I also use other types of things like replace and things like that. If you wanted to replace everything in here, you could either find them all and replace, or use replace function, the replace function, which would replace all of them in one shot. But if you just want to do it using SelStart and SelText, this is a way that you can find, change, and insert data using those items. Now, if you're interested in the error that we were talking about earlier, you'll notice that I've got the sub error. So when it finds an error in that procedure, it actually, because I just left sub error with nothing in it, it just does nothing when there's an error, which is a terrible way usually of programming. We do want to come back here and we want to look at, what is that exactly is happening when there's an error thrown here. And I found with SelStart and SelText, when you make changes, sometimes it does throw an error before update error, and you can trap that error. And so if I type in garden now, and the first run through is fine without replace, but if you use replace, if I say cool instead, this is the error that you might see. So you might be seeing this if you're trying to program using SelStart and SelText and changing the values. But what you can do is you can trap that error and ignore it if it's that error, and we can go back to our code and we can actually put in, if this error, then do this, or if it's that error, do that. That's usually the better way of handling errors that are thrown. And so we'll put a select case error on here. ERR is the error number that is has been created, and we'll say, if it's case 2115, then do this. You could have case, whatever other number and do something else, and then case else at the end, and in case else you'll use message box. You can type in a message box with the error in it like we did, and then now you'll notice it will ignore that 2115 error, and your code will run just fine and make the changes that you want to see to the text box below. So now if I change cool back to garden, you'll see that it changes with no error, and that is saved in the database, and it's fine, everything works. And that is how you can use your SelStart and SelText to make changes in text boxes on the fly. Want to join my community of data pros? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description.